nature to choose the ones that work.
So, in the game of life, it looks as if the house always wins. But it did make me wonder, what were the chances of life arising on its own?
It's been speculated that probably there would have to be a minimum of about 250 proteins to provide minimal life function. If that's really true, then I think it's almost inconceivable that life could have happened in some simple step-by-step way.
Okay, so the simplest form of life requires at least 250 proteins to function. What's so difficult about that?
Welcome to the Casino of Life. Who wants to spin for a chance to win?
Oh, sure. I'll give it a shot. What do I win?
Take a look at this.
Huh? How about the world's first single-cell organism? This perfectly aligned string of proteins could be yours.
Now, take a spin.
I won.
Tina, tell him how many times he needs to do that to win the prize.
250.
That's right, folks, and all in the correct order.
But that's impossible.
We've heard that before, haven't we, Richard?
Come on, Mother Nature, do your thing. You stupid machine! I hate you!
We're talking about something that's staggeringly improbable, roughly 1 in a trillion.
Let all of life choose 1 million, 1 trillion, 1 trillion trillion. The number is essentially zero. Something has to skew nature to choose the ones that work.
So, in the game of life, it looks as if the house always wins. But it did make me wonder,
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining the show. I could probably use a co-host, David, if you're available, or anyone else. I'm going to put a link in the chat if you'd like to join the stream. I want to thank everyone for their forbearance again. The show started late. I had to take care of Mom. She had some needs. And then I use another streaming service called Restream. And at the worst possible moment, Murphy's Law, the stream just suddenly died. They said, well, we can't. There's a connection problem. And I tried to do a retry, and then it said, well, that show is no longer available. So please, anyone that would like to join as a co-host. Otherwise, I'll do this solo. If you can give me just a couple minutes, and I'll join you. I just need a quick commercial break. Thanks. So thank you, everyone, for joining. This might be a quick show. I wanted to introduce a little bit of how I got involved in the intelligent design and creation science movement. There is an important distinction between intelligent design and creation science, and that would actually be a very nice topic for another show. Just briefly, the difference between intelligent design and creationism, creation science, creation theology, is that at least when we talk about creationism in the Christian, as far as Christian creationism, it is based mostly on it involves a literal interpretation or a certain interpretation of the accounts in the Bible, and so a timeline is built. So there's a lot of tie toward theology and mixed in with science, and that's creationism. Intelligent design, there are streams of thought that go all the way back to natural theology, all the way back to Cicero, and more recently in the time of William Paley, where the idea is that if we the famous essays by William Paley on the watch, if we happened upon a watch, we would infer that the watch is a machine and it is designed, therefore there is a designer. Hume, even though he rejected intelligent design, actually articulated the case for intelligent design very well. He did that very well. And that was when I was struggling with the Christian faith and having doubts about the Bible. I said, okay, can I reconstruct, is there independent evidence of the claims of the Bible without having to appeal to the Bible? And that's because that would be circular reasoning. So I began with just the case of intelligent design. I assumed that the universe was old, the fossil record was old, and even entertained the possibility of, just for the sake of argument, universal common ancestry. And I said, okay, how about the beginning of life? And the movie clip that you just saw is from the movie Expelled. And what I'm going to share today deals with an event that happened in 2005 that indirectly led to that movie, Ben Stein's movie Expelled. It was a motion picture documentary. So let me kind of go back in time a little bit to give some background. I'm going to show, let's see if I could show this screen. Give me one moment. I'm going to share a screen here. And this is the cover of the April 28th edition of the prestigious scientific journal Nature. It's the cover story. It says, "It's intelligent design coming to your campus." And it says, which is kind of funny, this is in 2005, but you can actually see, if you can barely look, it actually, I think it says 2006 here. So this was actually kind of their joke at predicting what would happen. And it says, "This journal contains material on evolution. Evolution by natural selection is a theory, not a fact. This material should be approached with an open mind, studied carefully, and critically considered." And that's kind of an unusual topic. So I actually was in that cover story, and it explained, it was a miracle. I'm a creationist, and I got in the cover story of Nature in April 28, 2005. So that is really the topic of today, the events surrounding this article. And so this was sort of the Lord telling me, hey, Sal, you need to be involved in this. You need to be involved in the intelligent design discussion. So in the year 2000, 2001, my dad got very, especially in 2001, my dad got very, very sick. He was terminally ill. Well, greetings, everybody. Oh, by the way, greetings to everyone, and I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. So in that time frame, 2001, Dad was terminally ill, and I was just a total mess, and I was beginning to have doubts about the Christian faith. I'd be praying, and my prayers weren't answered for Dad's health, that he would live, and I began to be frustrated. And more disturbingly, is I was going around asking people, "Why do you believe?" I'm having doubts. Either I'd get evasions, they'd start making accusations of me, like I wasn't committed enough to the faith or something like that. It wasn't too bad in 2001, but I do know that throughout my life, especially in my college years, there's some pretty nasty people that if you raised questions, you were just treated, you were shunned, treated, people talk behind your back. And I was pretty upset by that treatment. It's like, well, if I have questions, I think you'd be very eager. I would think these people would be very eager to try to answer it. Instead, they start condemning me for asking these questions. And this is one reason people, if you may not have noticed by now, that I enjoy talking to atheists. They're willing to ask questions, and they're willing to welcome questions that many Christians who are on the sideline or who are doubting Thomases like me they're willing to ask the questions that maybe sometimes Christians are afraid to just vocalize and articulate. And so I began openly asking these questions. I began in the process, I had these just terrible bouts of agnosticism. And then what really brought the issue to a head was that we were sending missionaries to the mission field, particularly to Muslim countries. And I began to think, Lord, if these people are just dying for a myth, it'd be immoral to be supporting this. And I said, so this changed my perspective on everything. I said, now I'm not just asking the question to persuade myself, but there's a moral issue here that I can't knowingly send someone off to their death for something that's just not true, or there's not even a shred of evidence. I said that would be wrong. And I began to be really upset. I said, how could churches be demanding so much of people's lives, and they're so unwilling to even offer a little help in explaining and persuading that this is the real thing? I mean, would we make a purchase of a house or any major capital investment or any investment in time in something where someone says, just take my word for it, and there's no consideration of the facts and no consideration of the reasons? And that really bothered me. And I was just like, yeah, I could say probably around 2001. It's been so long ago that I don't know the exact dates, but I probably for like a few days, I said, no, I don't believe in this anymore. It's like, I want to. And I told the Lord, if you're out there, you please help me, because I don't have any strength anymore. And I was thinking, it shouldn't be so hard to believe in the Christian God. If he's real, why do I have to exert effort to believe when I don't have to force myself to believe that there's air that I need to breathe, or that there's sunlight? I mean, I can experience this. I said, God, why are you so hidden? And that's also a topic for another show, the hiddenness of God. And then there are problems with evil. There have been some tragedies in my family, which I would presume is probably true for just about everyone. People eventually encounter death among their loved ones and friends and associates. And sometimes the events leading to death could be very traumatic. So there I was. I said, I don't know where to begin. And so I said, well, at the time I just finished my third science degree, and I was just like, this is the only thing I have is science. And at the time I had a degree in computer science. These are bachelor's degrees: bachelor's degree in computer science, bachelor's in electrical engineering with a minor in music, bachelor's in mathematics with a minor in physics. And how did I get those? Well, my first degree was to get computer science, and I got a job, and I was working in the aerospace and defense industry for 10 years, but then going back to school full time in the evening. So I was working full time, sometimes going to school full time at the same time. and having an extra job on the weekends as a security guard. Yeah, I was just nuts. I was just nuts. And so I didn't have much of a life for 10 years, just working that hard. I had to cut back to part-time school because that was just insanity to try to go school full-time and work full-time. So I accumulated this knowledge, and I think, well, you know, I still, my grades weren't all that good because my attention was split. But I was like, all right, the people in the church, they're praying for me, but there's some really nasty people. They're not answering my questions. All I have is science. Well, I said, okay, well, how do I begin this search for the Christian God? Help me to refine my faith, I said to the Lord. So I just started there, and I remember that Michael Behe visited my undergraduate school, George Mason University, in 2000. And I said, well, I could start there because Michael Behe did an appeal to the Bible in his book, Darwin's Black Box. And I said, I could start there. And I began to read about intelligent design. And I began to think, what's the difference between intelligent design and the Bible? But there was something that appealed to me about intelligent design because it was an independent witness of the Bible. Because when I would ask people, why do you believe the Bible? They'll open it up and say, well, the Bible says right here. And I said, guys, don't you get it? That's circular reasoning. That's absolutely of no help, because there are lots of books that will be claiming to speak for God, and they'll have a different theology than the Bible, and they'll say the same thing, that they came from God. So how can there be an independent witness of the Bible? And really, sadly, a lot of people in the church, they use those circular arguments. And I have to call out Ken Ham on one of these. In his debate with Bill Nye, he said, Ken Ham said, there's a book, read it, you have your answers there. And I was just like, that's circular reasoning. That was just like a non-starter at that point. And so that's why sometimes when you'll hear me making arguments in favor of the Bible, I will use materials outside of the Bible. And that actually makes many Christians in churches, and especially the leadership, uncomfortable. They would be fine if I just took verses from the Bible and just did some expository preaching, and they're happy. But the moment you start to say, okay, these are reasons to believe the Bible because of things outside the Bible, boy, they feel just they get really nervous. They'll say, well, that's great work, Sal, but then they'll never get back to you. You'll offer to teach their Sunday schools and give talks. They'll invite instead some fool. And I really mean that. I know that's harsh, but they'll invite some fool to talk about garbage and to teach their Sunday schools. And just so I could back that up, I'll tell you that one guy was advocating certain kinds of counseling for marriage and all. And then the next year he was caught beating his wife. Okay. So sorry, you could tell I have a little bit of sour grapes to some of the things that go on in the churches. And I found comfort in studying intelligent design. So even though the body of material actually did not have explicitly reference to Christianity, I found it valuable. So that was 2000, 2001, and I had piles of books. I was just reading, and boy, I was so distracted. I was just a wreck, because in 2003, I'll never forget, April 27th, 2003, my dad passed away. And I was just devastated. As you could tell, I'm a pretty sensitive guy, and I was just lost and just groping around for comfort. But by that point, April 27, 2003, I was thinking, yeah, I need to study more of this, because I find a lot of comfort in seeing evidence of intelligent design. And I was starting to argue with evolutionary biologists and promoters, and they're some of the nastiest people. And I was like, goodness, you guys are behaving even worse than the people in church, because now I'm asking just legitimate questions, and all you could do is just demonize me and tell me I'm stupid and this and that, and I'm dishonest and I'm a liar, and just like, okay, so I'm a stupid, dishonest scoundrel, but that still doesn't answer my questions, my scientific questions. Of course, that would get them really mad. And so I said, okay, this is the one source of comfort in my life, is to study. And now just recently, I was appreciating the verse where Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added unto you. But the first thing, before he says that, he said, consider the lilies of the valley. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed as one of these. And now looking back, I'm realizing why that was so comforting. There's a reason Jesus said to study his works, his creation, and you'd be comforted. You'd realize that there's a God who has wisdom and power beyond anything of human imagination. So despite all the problems, one could just get the sense that there is a God. He's just sort of letting you know by nature itself that he brought all this about. So just briefly, also one distinction I was making, kind of I wasn't clear, I realized the distinction between intelligent design and creationism. Intelligent design is like, let's just try to make the inference of design like Paley's watch based on the facts. We're not going to appeal to religious text. Creationism, particularly, really Christian creationism, it involves having a timeline of events that identify when intelligent design events happen. So you have old earth creationists, young earth creationists, and everything in between. In a timeline of events is constructed. And I have an interview with Stephen Meyer that I'll air that deals with that. So that was the 2003 time frame. And I had this renewed faith at a time when my life was falling apart. And I said, God, thank you so much. You've given me intelligent design. And I began to study young earth creationism at the time. I was an old earth creationist at the time in 2003, but then I began to have doubts. In 2004, I said, Lord, you've helped me so much. And I got together with one other student at George Mason University. So I was going to work full time. I was a senior engineer. I was a scientist, but then I was still going back to school because I'm a perpetual student. And I said, Christy, let's start a group that will promote intelligent design at George Mason University. And so there were just the two of us in the cafeteria. Christy and I were praying. And as we were praying for our ministry, there are just two of us, remember. I don't know why it came to my mouth, or at least in my mind when we were praying that prayer. It was just a brief prayer that I remember. I said, Lord, I'd like to get national publicity for our work here. I don't know why that came to my mind, because that's just like a ridiculous thing to be praying for. I mean, no one knew me. Absolutely no one knew me in the creationist or intelligent design movement. I was on some small internet forum that was mostly ignored. And I was like, oh Lord, just can we get national attention for our work? Well, so we started the group. And it wasn't but like 3 or 4 months later, I get an email from Casey Luskin. If that name sounds familiar, he eventually was an attorney at the Discovery Institute. Before that, he was a law student, and he founded the Intelligent Design Evolution Awareness Center. And he said, Salvador, a reporter from the journal Nature wants to talk to you. And I was like, how does he even know who I am? How does he even know who I am? And why would he be interested in me? And that was the beginning. And just fast forwarding, that's how I ended up a young earth creationist in the most prestigious scientific journal on the planet, Nature. It turned out they happened to be doing the editors and a lot of scientists were very alarmed with the intelligent design movement. They said they need to dedicate an issue in the journal Nature to quash, to destroy and eliminate the movement, because they're really panicked. So that's how I ended up. So now I'm going to share. Let me see if I could find a link, and I'm just going to try to read the article. and it brings back some memories. Share my screen here because it has a picture of the campus that I was a part of. And I'm going to just, if you'll forgive me, I'm just going to read some of this. So here it was. I was praying, God, please don't let the world forget our work here at George Mason University. And so here is, let me put the article, the link to the article in the chat here. Article link. It is public domain now. For the longest time, it was behind a paywall. But now it is. They've released it, and anyone can access it now. So let me show some highlights here. Yeah, that was me in 2005. This is the campus where we used to hang out. That's the cafeteria. That's George Mason University. Again, that's my undergraduate alma mater. My graduate alma mater is Johns Hopkins. So this was the April 28th. Some dates indicate April 27th, 2005. And so the cover story was Intelligent Design, Who Has Designs on Your Student's Mind? The intelligent design movement is a small but growing force on U.S. university campuses. For some, it bridges the gap between science and faith. For others, it goes beyond the pale. Jeff Broomfield meets the movement's vanguard. I just want to laugh. So 2 people on a college campus were enough to kind of upset them, and they're going to come after and try to interview them. That's what I thought was really funny. So 2 people. Well, it turned out it was more than that. And there's a story, and it's a little bit tragic that didn't involve me, but I got pulled into this. So here's the prestigious scientific journal Nature. And this is a report in a scientific journal, and I just laugh. People were really upset about this. So it says here, for a cold Tuesday night in March, the turnout is surprisingly good. 20 or so fresh-faced college students are gathered together in a room in the Student Union at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, the state's largest public university. They are there for the first meeting of Salvador Cordova's Intelligent Design and Evolution Awareness Club, IDEA. And I think he quoted me. Yeah, he quoted me accurately. I said, I have a great deal of respect for the scientific method. So I'll just read the article. I have a great respect for the scientific method, Cordova tells his attentive audience as he outlines the case for intelligent design. Broadly speaking, he says, the concept is that a divine hand has shaped the course of evolution. I need to pause here, just a little time out. That is not, strictly speaking, intelligent design. There's about maybe, say, 1 or 2% of the intelligent design movement that are atheists. They believe the universe is intelligent. It's kind of a pantheistic intelligent design. It's not the Christian God. There's another segment that believe in space aliens. And of course, there are problems with that. But it's close enough to say that a divine hand, because I'd say 98% of the intelligent design advocates are Christians of a variety of shades. This is surprising. It's actually mostly old Earth creationists that are intelligent, that were the founders of intelligent design. And that's a subject of another story. But anyway, I'll continue. The arguments are familiar ones to both advocates and opponents of the idea. Some biological systems are too complex, periodic explosions in the fossil record too large, and differences between species too great to be explained by natural selection alone. Cordova, who holds 3 degrees from the university, the most recent one in mathematics, argues that the development of life on Earth would be described better if an intelligent creator is added to the mix. And that's totally correct. That's totally correct. That's what I was arguing. An intelligent creator. Now, some people at the Discovery Institute were a little bit upset at me saying stuff like that. They said, that sounds too much like creationism. And I'm like, well, you know, at the time I wasn't making too much of a distinction. So if they wanted to fault me for that, they're really sensitive about it. And honestly, it's like, if my audience are creationists, it doesn't matter that much. There is an important distinction, so you can fault me for that. So Brumfield then says, he's going to cite some other people. Most scientists overwhelmingly reject the concept of intelligent design. To me, it doesn't deserve any attention because it doesn't make any sense, says Bruce Alberts, a microbiologist and president of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, amazingly, if you're at our talk yesterday, for those of you who saw my talk on essential cell biology, it was Bruce Alberts' book that I was highlighting, Essential Cell Biology. So that's kind of ironic that he's saying it doesn't make any sense, because the very author of the book that I promoted yesterday showed, it's just, I couldn't read the book and not think, oh Lord, your works are just immense. So I don't know why the blindness is there, but he did actually this is kind of an experience that I've had as I've read these science books by people that are against intelligent design. I said, you couldn't have made a better case for intelligent design by the books that you've written. Yeah, sometimes it's kind of poisoned and with evolutionary theory and abiogenesis theory, but the rest of it's just beautiful. All the evidence is right there, right under your nose, and you can't see it. So anyway, so that's Bruce Alberts. So I got to be interviewed in the same article that mentions Bruce Alberts. And he says, its proponents say that scientific knowledge is incomplete and there's no way to bridge the gap except for an intelligent designer, which is sort of saying science should stop trying to find explanations for things. And I know we can comment on that more, but then I'm not going to get through the article. But despite researchers' apparent lack of interest, or perhaps because of it, the movement is catching on among students on U.S. university campuses. Much of the interest can be traced to U.S. teenagers, more than 3/4 of whom believe before they reach university that God played some part in the origin of humans. And it says here, see the graphic. But others are drawn to the idea out of sheer curiosity. And so you can look it up yourself. The graphic is not showing real well here. But so which of the following statements comes closest to your views on origin and development of human beings? 43% said human beings had developed over millions of years from less advanced life forms, but God guided this process. And then 38% said God created human beings pretty much in their present form at one time within the last 10,000 years or so. So this is, oh goodness, 70. That's like 81%. There's some rounding error here. And then 18% said human beings have developed over millions of years from less advanced forms of life, but God had no part in the process. Some of those statistics are well known to you. And it says here, Stephen Meyer, students are in the challenge authority mode at that time in their life, and I think they're intrigued, says Stephen Meyer, director of the Center for Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute, the nation's largest intelligent design think tank in Seattle, Washington. Since the first Idea Club began at the University of California, San Diego in 1999, more than 20 chapters have opened on college campuses around the country. In addition, a small number of academics have begun to offer courses on intelligent design. Yes, that's kind of exciting. There are not many. Relative unease. And by the way, this is so funny. The reporter Jeff Brumfield says this. This is his article. He says Darwinists, and oh boy, a lot of evolutionary guys were just so angry at Brumfield because he referred to them as Darwinists in the prestigious scientific journal Nature. This was a God thing. So he says, Darwinists are divided in their response to the idea's growing profile on campus. see natural divisions. Many feel that the very presence of intelligent design in universities is legitimizing the movement and eroding the public's perception of science. Intelligent design advocates want to split open the public's understanding of science and convince people that you can call on the supernatural for a scientific explanation, warns Barbara Forrest, a philosopher at Southeastern Louisiana University in Hammond and co-author of Creationism's Trojan Horse, The Wedge of Intelligent Design. But others feel that the movement deserves an airing at the university level, even if they oppose its teaching in public schools. Quote, "I think that college is a place for experimentation," says Eugenia Scott, director of the National Center for Science Education, a group based in Oakland, California, that promotes the teaching of evolution in public schools. If intelligent design is gaining ground on college campuses, she adds, then scientists are as much to blame as anyone. I think college professors can do a better job of teaching evolution, she says. Back in the student union, Cordova is carefully pointing out what intelligent design can and can't do. The concept makes no attempts to verify the creation myth or other biblical events, such as the flood, he says. And that's true. That's standard intelligent design theory. Nor does it worry about whether Earth is a few thousand years old, as most creationists believe, or 4.5 billion years old, the current geological estimate. Intelligent design, Cordova notes, does not even attempt to prove the type of deity involved. It just points to some sort of supernatural intervention. In other words, he says intelligent design doesn't have any theology to it. And yes, it doesn't have any theology to it except maybe what we might call natural theology, but it's certainly not creationist theology. But so why would a creationist be interested in this? And that's really a subject for another topic. So you'll hear me argue. I love arguing creationism. I love arguing intelligent design. The important thing is intelligent design does not preclude creationism, but it does preclude things. If we argue for intelligent design in the origin of life, it's an argument against abiogenesis. At certain levels, like say eukaryotic evolution, we can make the same argument that even if we assume universal common descent, it needed intelligence to make it. And that's just very close then to arguing it needs a miracle. It's almost the same thing, but not quite. So people are saying, well, why are you starting with a non-biblical worldview? And that's actually a topic for another discussion. But let me just offer this out, especially for Christians or doubting Thomases out there. If having the right worldview is the prerequisite for having the right worldview, then none of us would be saved or come to the truth. What enabled the Christian faith to advance was not going to people that had the right view to begin with. It's going to people that had the wrong worldview, talking in their language like it does in Acts 17. When Paul was talking to pagans, he used the language of the pagans to help them understand, to kind of help open their eyes that the worldview was false based on the facts and even on their own self-contradictory principles. And intelligent design is a step in that direction. So I always viewed intelligent design as something akin to the way Paul argued and defended the Christian faith, or introduced the Christian faith to people who didn't regard scriptural authority. And so that was a start. And at that time, around that time in my life, I was having problems accepting the Bible as true. And so some of this discussion of intelligent design was kind of my ladder back into the faith. So he says, that is me, yours truly, intelligent design doesn't have any theology to it. It is that distinction that has helped propel the small community of intelligent design proponents to the forefront of U.S. politics. In 1987, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a Louisiana law that mandated teaching creation science in schools because the premise of the research was based on biblical texts. As intelligent design does not draw directly from biblical sources, Christian fundamentalist groups have seized on it as a possible way to force creationism back into the classroom. Okay, I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's just for your, I'm just reading from Jeff Brumfield's perspective. Great guy, by the way. Last October, a school board in Dover, Pennsylvania voted to include intelligent design in its curriculum. And similar plans are now being considered in at least 6 states, including Kansas, Mississippi, and Arkansas. These plans include giving teachers new guidelines and placing stickers on biology textbooks that question the scientific status of evolutionary theory. Amen. But that didn't happen. And the public schools now are a total mess. Not all of them. I went to a nice public school when they were still good, but now they're just indoctrination centers for socialism and anti-Christian ideas. It's just terrible. And so even at that time, I was just saying, pull your kids out of school. This is not going to happen. Well, I wasn't fully, I was naive enough to think that public schools would be reasonable and that they'd have some conscience to teach the right thing. And that dream, this was again in 2005, that dream totally fell apart. Intelligent design advocates have mixed reactions to the Christian rights support of their work. On the one hand, the movement is largely dependent on funding from wealthy conservative philanthropists. That, according to Meyer, is why a 1999 funding document from the Discovery Institute argued that intelligent design had reopened the case for a broadly theistic understanding of nature and would eventually lay the groundwork for a series of debates and legal challenges over what should be taught in America's classrooms. Although Meyer is willing to promote such perceptions, he concedes that they can cause problems. For intelligent design researchers who would like to see the concept peer-reviewed and accepted by the scientific community, the politics are frustrating and potentially dangerous. The political goals associated with intelligent design may lead many scientists to reject it outright as little more than creationism in a cheap tuxedo. Some of the policy proposals that have been made, for example, the Dover case, are frankly, from our point of view, distracting, says Meyer. We want to focus on intelligent design as an emerging research program. Even considered on its research merits, scientists mostly agree that intelligent design rests on shaky foundations. For one thing, Alberts points out, the concept often makes its claims based on gaps in the current body of scientific knowledge. The whole history of science is that these gaps are always filled, he says. No, that's not true, but I let him speak his case. And by the way, what better way to prove design or miracles than having a gap? That's the subject of another talk, of course. So in reading this, I'm getting all these ideas for future shows. For example, one common argument used by intelligent design advocates is that the bacterial flagellum, a whirling tail that some bacteria use to move around, is too complex to be explained by evolution alone. I'm quite sure that within a decade or two, we'll understand where it came from because we're sequencing more and more bacterial genomes, Albert says. But to give up now is totally ridiculous. Actually, if you've seen my discussion on protein probabilities, even if we assume universal common ancestry and we've done these phylogenetic reconstructions, it actually does not. It does a very poor explanation for explaining why these things would assemble, because there have to be even subtle modifications to these proteins to enable them to work. And so I have a lot of problems with these so-called phylogenetic reconstructions, such as Nick Matsky did, and saying, oh, this is proof. And I have some science to that. Ironically, it came from Albert's book, where he was showing the microtubules, and they're just, I could just see evolutionists saying, oh, well, look at these are obviously through gene duplication. And as I studied Albert's books, I said, absolutely not. That's not through gene duplication. Just because they're similar doesn't mean they evolved from a common ancestor, because you need all three paralogs to make this thing work. That creature would be totally dead if it didn't have. So there was no common ancestry. All these phylogenetic reconstructions are just bunk. So back to the article. So by the way, this was 15 years ago, and the problem of the bacterial flagellum hasn't been solved. He was giving it just a decade, and they haven't solved it. All they did is come up with a bait and switch, which is a phylogenetic reconstruction. It is not an explanation in terms of mechanics and physics like an engineer would ask, because an engineer would say, well, yeah, you've shown that some of these parts hypothetically could have been laying around, but can you take parts and put them in a junkyard and have a tornado whirl through it and it assembles? There has to be more than just proteins to make a bacterial flagellum. And so people like Nick Matsky will say, well, look at all these pre-existing proteins. You only had to add maybe 2 that are brand new. And as I tried to show in my protein probabilities talk, it's really hard just to add even 2 new proteins, right? Yeah, there are all these issues. It's just not that trivial. But they're able to pretend that they actually solved the problem. And it's kind of delusional. It perpetuates falsehoods. Anyway, he said, but to give up is totally ridiculous. And as much as I love Bruce Alberts, it's like, well, okay, how big of a miracle do you need before you give up and say, God did it? If you say, well, there's no miracle big enough, then, there's a problem. I would argue science has actually succeeded because it has shown us that there is a designer. So crisis of faith. Perhaps surprisingly, many theologians are equally upset by intelligent design. Yeah, they're theistic evolutionists like, say, Joshua Swami Das. He doesn't like me using that term, and I apologize in advance, but there are a lot of people who are professing Christians that don't like intelligent design, and they fight it tooth and nail. Perhaps surprisingly, many theologians are equally upset by intelligent design. The basic problem that I have theologically is that God's activity in the world should be hidden, says George Murphy, a Lutheran theologian, PhD physicist, and author of The Cosmos in the Light of the Cross. By the way, Murphy is not just a theologian, he's also a pastor. He was really nasty to me when I was trying to be polite. And I said, yeah, good on you trying to show the love of Christ to your brothers. He just treated me like a dog. So, some of these people that are wearing, some of these ministers or Christian advocates, wearing the collar and saying they believe in evolution and they also are Christians. There's some of them, they're the greatest guys. God bless them. But there's some really nasty folks there. And it left a bad taste in my mouth. And there was one teaching at a Christian college, Calvin College, and he kept repeating that same thing. I'm a Christian and I believe in evolution. Well, it wasn't but a year later he got caught having an affair. He was married, but he was having an affair with an undergraduate. They expelled him. And lo and behold, he resurfaces a couple years later as an editor of a scientific journal. And he says, I'm happily no longer a Christian. So just a data point, a lot of these theistic evolutionists, I worry for them, especially the ones that were raised as creationists. Sometimes that's on their path toward agnosticism and atheism. So I feel bad naming names. The gentleman involved is Steve Matheson. And it's really kind of bad because Steve Matheson helped me. If he hears this, he's probably going to be really upset now that he helped me. He actually is the editor-in-chief of Cell Reports, and he actually endorsed one article that I wrote with John Sanford. He didn't endorse it. He endorsed the conclusion. He agreed with it. He said, Sal, your article's lousy. I wouldn't accept it, but you're right. That was really funny. It's like, I hope he forgot that I was pointing out the fact of his infidelities at the college he taught, at the Christian college he taught, where he was literally messing around with one of the undergraduates there. So yeah, there's lots of dirty laundry, and then there's Francisco Ayala, who is a Catholic priest, became an evolutionary biologist. Well, he got expelled. This is really funny. At the he became very rich after he left the Catholic faith, because he had a winery. So these Catholics are really good at making wine. Oh my goodness, they're some of the best, out there in the monasteries. They're good at cultivating grapes and building those distilleries or whatever. I don't think you need to distill wine. Anyway, he got filthy rich, and then he became a professor at some university out there in California. He made a $10 million donation. The university accepted it, and it was right after sometime after they accepted it, they finally said, we have to fire him because there have been allegations of sexual harassment. And so they fired him, and they just trashed his reputation, destroyed all the archives. And I said, yeah, there's dirty dealing on both sides. They probably, I would almost guess, I can't prove this. I would almost guess they kind of suspected it. But it's like, oh, let's get that donation, then we'll get rid of him. So yes, I'm just sorry to say that it's just been a pattern I've seen that when someone comes from a creationist leaning background and they start believing in evolution, it just one thing leads to another. That was not the case with me. I did not come from a creationist background. I came from a public school background, and I was raised a Catholic. I'm Protestant now, evangelical reformed. I was raised in the Catholic Church. I went to public school. I learned evolution, and I thought, wow, that's really cool that we came from bacteria, and then we slowly evolved into like little creatures. We came from the sea, and then mammals, and then apes and cavemen, and then human beings, and then we're just going to keep advancing. It was kind of in my own naive way. I was thinking, oh, that's proof of God. That means he ordained the universe to be constantly improving, and humanity will live happily ever after. Granted, that was totally naive, but I accepted the evolutionary ideas as a youth. And in some respects, I think that actually made it easier, my journey easier, because I didn't have to defend creationism. I was just curious. So let me go back to the article here. Murphy says Lutherans believe that God's primary revelation came through Jesus Christ, and many find it distasteful that additional divine fingerprints appear in nature. Catholics, for their part, have accepted evolution based on the idea that God could still infuse the natural human form with a soul at some point from the distant past. And even the evangelical Christians who make up the backbone of Intelligent Design's political supporters sometimes object to its inability to prove whether Christianity is true religion. And I think on some level, this is actually pretty accurate reporting. Not that it's true, but it's accurately reporting the sentiments out there. We've had some people claiming to be Christians, and I believe many of them are, that are saying that we shouldn't look to the facts to actually prove Christianity. Definitely in creationism, it's like, no, we shouldn't re-examine the geological record. We shouldn't be examining astrophysics and the formation of the solar system. We shouldn't be examining cellular biology and re-examining the question of abiogenesis. We should just try not to curse here. We should just accept that rubbish, that garbage, all those cow pies as science. And it shouldn't be, we shouldn't examine the facts to actually support our Christian faith. There are a lot of people that argue that. I don't see why. I mean, I think that's totally ridiculous, but that's what I've fought a lot. And to my grave disappointment, that's the closet attitude of a lot of people, even in mainline evangelical churches. It's like, you just got to believe, brother. You got to believe. It's right there in the book. It's right there in the book. And of course, anyone who's has even a little bit of critical thinking will say, there's something that's just not, that's kind of like circular reasoning. But I get that all the time. So anyway, let me, I'm not trying to offend anyone. If you disagree with me, that's fine. Please air your disagreements. I think it's great we could discuss this. So yeah, that's the other thing that was really funny. There are a lot of creationists, especially young Earth creationists, that were upset with the intelligent design movement. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the intelligent design movement, a lot of the people at the Discovery Institute are old Earth creationists. Stephen Meyer's an old Earth creationist. William Dembski is, Michael Behe accepts universal common ancestry. He accepts the Big Bang, and he's not a young Earth creationist. He is Mr. Intelligent Design, and I love his work. But there are a lot of people that are like, oh, that's not based on God's word, therefore it's false. And so, goodness, I better review the show, because this is good material for another show where we could talk about the intelligent design movement and kind of the tension between young Earth creationism and intelligent design. And I just wanted to laugh when people say intelligent design is creationism. I'm just like, no, why don't you ask some young Earth creationists? Ask young Earth creationists, and a lot of them will say, no, that's not the real deal. Intelligent design is not creationism. The young Earth creationism is the real creationism. And of course, then you'll get the old Earth creationists, and I'm not going to go there today. So, and yet the students listening to Cordova's lecture seem intrigued. Everyone in the room is Christian, and half are working towards degrees in science, medicine, or engineering. Yeah, praise God for that. Yeah, they're coming out to my talk. Future scientists, medical doctors, and engineers. And they're intrigued. And that's a theme I'd like to point out, is that a lot of apologetics work is to encourage Christians. We've tended to look at intelligent design or creationism as kind of an outreach thing. I view it as a source of inspiration to encourage us in our faith, to solidify it. That's how we grow in faith. Anyway, back to the article. Many are also frustrated by the exclusively secular tone of their science classes, and to these students, intelligent design offers an appealing alternative that puts God squarely back in the center of things. Others, including Cordova himself, arrived at intelligent design from almost the opposite direction. Over a coffee earlier that day, he explains how intelligent design helped him resolve his own spiritual crisis 5 years ago. Since high school, Cordova had been a devout Christian, but as he studied science and engineering at George Mason, he found his faith was being eroded. Quote, the critical thinking and precision of science began to really affect my ability to just believe something without any tangible evidence. By the way, that's an accurate quote. Jeff Brumfield, great reporter, he had a recording device, and I could tell he was very precise in making sure that I was quoted accurately. Yes, I know atheists were laughing at me that I said that. And I was like, yeah, I know, I'm embarrassed about it now, because I was kind of being bullied in church to just believe. I mean, it's just terrible what happens. I said, I began to realize some of these evangelical churches are atheist factories. Where do you think people like Matt Dillahunty, Tracy Harris, or any number of these atheist promoters, where do you think they come from? They come from evangelical churches. And they're some of the worst. Some of my most militant opponents have come from this mindset. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't surprise me, because it's a climate where if you question and you ask reasonable questions, sometimes you just get, oh, goodness, just terrible things said about you. And I'm still kind of recovering from that trauma. And so, yes, that was a situation where I was being demanded from the pulpit. Pastors would be saying, you got to believe, you don't have enough faith, your commitment's just not there. And I just kept hearing it every Sunday. I'm just like, well, it'd really help if there were tangible evidence. So you could see now why I was very motivated to study facts. I said it didn't matter if I had to crawl through crawl through crushed glass, figuratively speaking, to find the truth. If there are facts out there, I was going to dig. Because it meant that much to me. And no, it wasn't enough just to believe without any evidence. And that's not what the Bible teaches. Look at John 10:38. Jesus said, if you do not believe my words, believe the works, and God has left works for us to study. So I would actually argue it's unbiblical to say just believe without any evidence. That's not what Jesus taught. That's not the way Peter argued in the early chapters of Acts when he was appealing to people to believe in Jesus Christ. He was appealing to events, to facts, to things that they had seen. So anyway, continuing on. The critical thinking and precision of science began to really affect my ability to just believe something without any tangible evidence, he says. The breaking point came in 2000 when a woman from his Bible study group put her faith before personal safety, traveling to Afghanistan as part of a covert Christian mission in a country that was at the time a militant Islamic theocracy. He felt unhappy accepting the promotion of such activities unless he could be sure Christianity was the true faith. And that was, again, a very accurate characterization in my view. I got to tell you, it's refreshing that people will actually quote you and characterize your views accurately. I go on the internet and I see the first thing when I'm trying to see what people have to say in the criticism, straw man right away. They'll attribute quotes to me. They'll attribute ideas to me or things I said that I never said. And it ends up being the topic of an entire show. And I'm just like, oh, it's just terrible. But I got quoted accurately. And if I can, let me see. That girl in my church, Heather Mercer. And she had a dual membership with McLean Bible Church, where I was attending at the time, and another church in the Northern Virginia area. And around the 2000 time frame, there was this prayer list going around and saying, please pray for Heather Mercer. She has just gotten put in jail in Afghanistan by the Taliban. And I was pretty upset by that. I said, why do you go to, I was thinking, why is the church sending people to places where they're not welcome? Why don't you just shake the dust off your sandals and say, I'm done with you guys. If you don't want Jesus Christ, just go to hell. Really, it's kind of a mean thing to say. That was what was in my mind. I'm trying to be a little bit more charitable these days. But Heather Mercer went there and I was upset. And I said, okay, I'll pray for her. I think it was a really stupid decision, but I'll pray for her. And, again, that was what I was thinking. And I repent of perhaps not being more sensitive to God's mission for the lost, because that was a very courageous act on her part. But again, remember, that was a certain my views now are not, my views then are not my views now. I was just pretty upset with 9/11 and what the Islamic faith was doing to destroy. And it's like, just don't deal with these guys. And Heather Mercer got thrown in jail. And I was like, that really troubled me. I said, well, Lord, this puts another dimension on the question of whether Jesus is real. Because if Jesus is not real, then the church is sending lovely young ladies like this to the mission field to die for something that's false. So here's the Wikipedia article on Heather Mercer. Now there's actually this story had a happy ending because we were praying for her. When George Bush Jr. started bombing Afghanistan and then invading it, the Army Rangers rescued her. Miracle. All of us were celebrating. And so that her story did have a happy ending. So you can look up her Wikipedia article. So even though it didn't mention it in this Nature article, this woman from his Bible study group. So slight correction from my church. She wasn't actually in my Bible study. That was actually another girl who went to another mission field that was dangerous. And there were actually two young ladies I was very upset about that they were going to the mission field and risking their lives to people that I thought were pretty hard at heart. I really wanted these people to just live in the United States and live happily ever in the United States. Of course, now that where I see the United States going, I have different opinions now 15 years later. So I'll just continue. He felt unhappy accepting the promotion of such activities unless he could be sure Christianity was a true faith. Scientific vacuum. So Cordova turned to his scientific training in the hope of finding answers. If I could even prove one small part of my faith through purely scientific methods, that would be highly satisfying intellectually, he says. He has since read a stack of books on cosmology and intelligent design, and has become a major advocate for the movement, representing the idea at public debates, challenging evolutionary theory in online chats, and starting clubs at George Mason and several other Virginia colleges. That's really kind of funny because, you know, I really wasn't that well known. It wasn't that big of a deal. There weren't that many people. It was only by a miracle we had 20 people that day that showed up at my meeting. Some of our meetings had no one show up. So yes, God put enough of a stir in this whole thing to give this idea publicity. So recall back at the beginning of the show where I said, I prayed, Lord, please give this work. And I was praying there with Christy. The two of us are praying, please give this work that we're doing here national attention. This getting it in the journal Nature was the beginning of worldwide attention, and our work was not forgotten. So again, this prayer answered by God. Cordova's story is more common than many scientists might think. According to Keith Miller, a geologist at Kansas State University in Manhattan, who is an evangelical Christian, I think a lot of students go through a period of being very conflicted about their faith, especially if they have an innate interest in science, Miller says. He knows a number of students who have fallen away from their beliefs as a result of their university experience. They've so identified their faith with a particular view of what creation means that it becomes an all or nothing kind of thing, he says. I do think intelligent design offers an alternative, although I would argue it's not a good one. So this is also leading to something I may talk about at yet another show. I have a heart for students raised in the Christian faith who go off into college, and they're in an environment that is not just hostile, but then they adopt a new thinking. If they're going to be good scientists, they're going to learn that skepticism is really important, and the skepticism begins with your own self. You begin to question you recognize your fallibility. You really know that when you're in class, when you're around smart people, and you realize, boy, it's really hard to even get a 50 on some of my exams, much less 100. It's like, I really don't know it all. And you begin to question your ability to be so sure of things. And that's a quality. If I had, when I was hiring people, when I was a senior engineer, if I were hiring people for my teams, I wouldn't want someone that wasn't skeptical of his own work or other people's work. I was, especially working in civil aviation, you'd want someone that would double, triple check their work. Skepticism is a good mindset. God made some of these people that way, and they're going to have certain challenges with their faith because they have to kind of test things out, at least, go through a lot more due diligence before they're endorsed something. And so a lot of people will start losing their faith because the way that they were taught the Christian faith in their church was like, oh, just believe, just read it in the book, just believe. And then they go off into learning how the scientific method and how we arrive at certain conclusions. It's like, it's just totally different. And when you learn science there and mathematics, I knew when I was studying physics, they'll point to this experiment that shows why we accept a theory now when we didn't before. And it's like, wow, why don't I have that in the Bible? and that's subject of another show. So you could tell I'm not going to have any shortage of topics to cover. So going on, but university lecturers are rarely able to offer students other alternatives that allow them to reconcile faith and science. Part of the problem has to do with constraints, says Larry Rockwood, a population ecologist at George Mason. The pressure is to work with the graduate students, do your research, and teach your classes, he says. What's the reward for working with undergraduate student clubs? Not much. More fundamentally, most lecturers are unsure of how to handle the concerns of deeply religious students, says Joe Handelsman, a plant pathologist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. By the way, that's John Sanford's alma mater, University of Wisconsin. When I talk to these students individually, I don't feel it's my place to replace what their families or churches have taught them, she says. There's a lot of confusion about where the line is and how much it's okay to offend your students. Scott, who is perhaps the nation's most high-profile Darwinist. Oh, don't you just love it? A scientific journal calling people Darwinists. I just had to interrupt. Okay, going back. Scott, who is perhaps the nation's most high-profile Darwinist, is frustrated by the scientific community's inability to grapple with the issue. The point here is that Americans don't want to be told that God had nothing to do with it, she says. And that's the way the intelligent design people present evolution. Scientists need to do a better job of explaining that science makes no attempt to describe the supernatural, and so has no inherent conflict with religion, she argues. College professors need to be very aware of how they talk about things such as purpose, chance, cause, and design, she says. You should still be sensitive to the kids in your class. Now, this was actually one of the most interesting things in the whole article. She has been fighting creationism and intelligent design tooth and nail in the public schools. But here she is advocating a little bit more openness in universities. And that's why I got excited. I was disappointed to see where all that turned out. And maybe someday I'll share a letter publicly, a public exchange I had with her. Very cordial. She was the head of the National Center for Science Education. It's the NCSE. We sometimes joke that the NCSE actually stands for National Center for Selling Evolution. So anyway, Eugenie Scott was saying that in her letter to me, she said, it's thoroughly appropriate. She said, I'll fight intelligent design being taught in public schools, but it's thoroughly appropriate to have classes on this at the university level. I began to get excited. It turned out that despite the fact she said that, the academic climate now, they definitely won't allow it in most mainstream universities. So this was still an interesting thing. She was saying, yeah, let's talk about it. Maybe she's changed her mind, but that was, I'll just continue here. Back at George Mason, Cordova is wrapping up his lecture and planning his next step for promoting intelligent design on campus. According to a survey he commissioned from Campus Freethinkers, an atheist student group, 75% of students would be interested in taking a course on intelligent design if it were offered. Cordova says he hopes the poll will convince college administrators to offer such a course. I would love to see an intelligent design class on one of these campuses, he says. I don't want to indoctrinate students. I would just like them to get to know the theory. A little bit about that passage there. Just to clarify, I did a poll at James Madison University where I helped found another intelligent design club there. It lasted maybe 1 or 2 years. And I said, well, if a poll of student interest in an intelligent design class were conducted on this campus and it were done by intelligent design advocates, some people would question the validity of the survey. So I went out to the atheists, and you know that you see how I deal with people of, who are non-Christians. I like hanging out with them, and I think they sense that I'm not out there to you know, I do preach fire and brimstone to some extent, but I try not to, you know, I try to treat them as a fellow human being, as my neighbor. I try to treat them as a neighbor that's lost, that's about to go to hell. And I try to show them kindness. Now there's some real jerks out there. You'll see a different side of me dealing with some of these others that thankfully that doesn't happen often. So I had a very good relationship with these atheists. They're my friends. They said, Sal, we want to help you out. We're kind of curious too. You know, we don't share your views, but we're curious. I said, can we just do this just as an experiment? Let's find out the sentiment of how people are interested in this. I said, we may not agree on God or the existence of God, but we can't agree that people have their sentiments. Let's just measure that. And that was of interest to them. And they're very generous. And I said, just as thanks, I'll give a small donation to your atheist club for helping me with this. I conducted that survey in the fall of 2004. I had no idea that shortly thereafter this reporter would contact me, and I kept praying, Lord, the results of this poll says 75% of students want to study this. You know why? Because they don't get it in their church. They don't get it in their church. They don't get this taught in their church. They're not taught it properly in their churches, in their Christian circles, maybe even in their homeschools. If they're not going to get taught in their churches and in their homes, where are they going to learn it? And so I was getting a little frustrated. I said, well, they can take these general education credits, instead of taking some of these garbage courses, why don't they take one that explores these topics? And James Madison University had at the time about 20,000 students. And I said, if 75% of those 20,000 students, let's say the poll is off by 10%, is off and only 10%, not 75%, you'd still get 2,000 students just clamoring to get in this class. Do you know I was suggesting it be taught in a religious department, religion and philosophy. I said, your departments would explode. And of course, I was naive about how secular universities are. I did manage to get a little bit of intelligent design taught at the university level. I gave a DVD to the chair of the philosophy and religion department on intelligent design, and it was The Privileged Planet and Unlocking the Mystery of Life by Lustre Media, and he's showing it in his classes. I was thrilled. Moved a little bit forward. So this has been my passion, to teach intelligent design and creationism at the college level. I've been kind of distressed by how expensive colleges are. So I'm still committed to trying to teach, create course material to teach people, if for nothing else, for their own personal fulfillment. I hope at some point that they can get college credits for the time they invest, because some people said, well, why don't they just study on their own? Why do you have to teach in class? It's like, well, shouldn't they get college credit for learning something that is at the college level versus the garbage that they're being fed? Of course, I can't say that to college administrators because they love feeding garbage. And so we haven't quite collectively figured out how to get around those problems. But anyway, that was my dream. So I don't want to indoctrinate the students. I just would like them to get to know the theory. And that's true. I just want to say, here's what the theory says, and leave it at that. That's for intelligent design, not for creationism. As for his personal future, Cordova adds that he would like to continue pursuing a career in science. Next year, he plans to apply to study cosmology at graduate school. And so this was 2005. It took 2 years. I ended up applying at Johns Hopkins University, and I did get to study cosmology, physics, astrophysics, general relativity, quantum mechanics, plasma physics, classical mechanics, solid state theory. Now, this is the part of the article that is tragic. So we're going on an hour, 15 minutes. I'll briefly cover this and yet another subject of another show. Let me see if I have it. Oh my goodness, they don't have it here. This is going to be the subject of another show. Let's see if they have it. Oh yeah, this is the tragic part. Okay, so Jeff Brumfield comes to our talk in March. He came there and he reported on my talk, and he was saying all these glowingly nice things about me, which I'm very grateful for that. A lot of scientists were pretty upset that this ended up in a scientific journal, and it spoke of me in such a nice way. But now the tragic part. This was our first meeting of this Intelligent Design Club. A professor of biology attended, and it was Carolyn Crocker. And that ties to the movie clip that I showed at the beginning of this talk. Carolyn Crocker. So granted, this is March of 2005. Carolyn Crocker says that she hadn't meant to start a controversy when she mentioned intelligent design while teaching her second-year cell biology course at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia last semester. But many of her colleagues say that the soft-spoken molecular biologist who received a PhD in immunopharmacology from the University of Southampton, UK, has gone too far. Sitting in an empty teaching lab, Crocker tells how she had been barred by her department from teaching both evolution and intelligent design. It's an infringement of academic freedom, she says. She's appealing the case to a grievance committee. Crocker is one of a handful of professors nationwide who are introducing intelligent design into college-level teaching. Some, like Crocker, try to work the idea into their biology classes, but increasingly intelligent design advocates are teaching their material outside of the science curriculum in special seminars and one-time courses, says Barbara Forrest, a philosopher at Southeastern Louisiana in Hammond. Those efforts meet with a mixed response from faculty members and administrators on campus. Michael Behe, an intelligent design advocate and biochemist at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, teaches an elective first-year seminar on popular arguments on evolution. The majority of my colleagues disagree with me, he says, but my chairman supports my right to have my own views and argue them in a public setting. In contrast, William Dembski, a mathematician at Baylor University in Texas, and another prominent intelligent design researcher, says that he is no longer allowed to teach on campus. And essentially, I've had about a 5-year sabbatical, he complains. Stories such as Dembski's make some intelligent design supporters fearful of expressing their views in public. One researcher approached by Nature for this article declined to be interviewed because he did not yet have tenure. So, is there any doubt at this point that a professor, even if he doesn't teach it in class, but publicly outside of the class mentions that he's a Christian or he believes in intelligent design, that he might be subject to sanctions? Now, remarkably, William Dembski, he's not a young earth creationist. He had some interesting things to say about young earth creationism, kind of humorous, not nasty. It was really kind of humorous. That's an act of God. He signed a university contract and he was paid, but they said, we don't like your work, but we signed a contract. Just don't teach. We'll just pay you. We'll just pay you for 5 years. Do whatever you want. Just don't teach the kids here at Baylor. And so what does he do? He studies intelligent design, starts his own business on a paid salary, becomes a multimillionaire. So that's a beautiful story, but he paid a price. He paid a price for that. He has 7 science degrees, 2 PhDs. Brilliant guy. So that's an aside. By the way, William Dembski was very instrumental. He tried to get me a scholarship at Baylor before they shut down Robert Marx's lab. So I was supposed to go to, I was entertaining going to Baylor to get my master's degree. And I applied to 2 places, Johns Hopkins and Baylor. Baylor got shut down, and miraculously I got accepted into Johns Hopkins. I shouldn't have been, but that was a work of God. Anyway, so I'll just continue here. Darwinists are divided over whether intelligent design deserves a classroom airing. Forrest says that she believes professors shouldn't be allowed to teach unsubstantiated scientific concepts to their students. This is not a question of academic freedom. This is a question of professional competence, she says. But Eugenie Scott, director of the National Center for Science Education, Selling Evolution, in Oakland, California, which vehemently opposes intelligent design in high schools, takes a different view. She thinks such discussions are more acceptable in a college environment, but believes it must be made clear to students that intelligent design is theology, not science. Crocker hopes that she will be allowed to continue talking to students about intelligent design. Her lectures drew criticism from some and praise from others. Notably, she says, her Muslim students seemed to like it. She maintains that the talks help students to think independently about ideas, such as evolution. My goal is to teach students to think for themselves, she says. Whether and in what form her intelligent design teachings will continue is now up to faculty members and administrators. The university doesn't have a policy or rule on whether certain topics should be discussed, says Daniel Strupa, a mathematician and dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at George Mason University. But he adds, he questions whether a concept with theological underpinnings really belongs in a science course. I'm a Buddhist, he says, but I don't think we should teach reincarnation in biology class. So I know that kind of ended abruptly, and there's a picture of an empty classroom. I don't know if I have the picture. There's a picture of Carolyn Crocker sitting in an empty classroom, and then this was kind of to highlight this picture here. So what happened to Carolyn Crocker? This article that included me that I just read from the prestigious scientific journal Nature, April 28th, 2005. 3 weeks after this aired, Carolyn Crocker was dismissed from George Mason University. Of course, they didn't say she was fired. They said, well, her contract just expired, which is not exactly true. One of the department chairs deceived her, lied to her, made her sign something that she unwisely signed, which was her dismissal letter. You know, she thought the guy was going to deal with her fairly, and he misrepresented what was the contract in the documents that she was signing. I mean, you know how this can be. It's like, oh, this was an agreement we made up, and, you know, just sign it, and, you know, just run in the middle while she's teaching a class and say, we got to sign this now. And, you know, she's a trusting individual, and God bless her for that. You know, we tend to deal with other people the way that we view ourselves. If you're a trustworthy individual, you tend to view other people to behave the same way. And I've had problems with that a lot, because there's some people that are not like me. It doesn't, you know, the things that they do, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. Sleep. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night, much less live with myself. But there's some of these dirty dealings. Carolyn Crocker was teaching at George Mason University and simultaneously at Northern Virginia Community College. She got essentially fired from George Mason. Of course, what does the administration do? They'll say, oh, Carolyn Crocker was a wonderful professor. Her dismissal had nothing to do with the fact that she's an intelligent design advocate. And it was just a budgetary decision. You know, they just whitewash it all. Well, she filed the lawsuit, and you're going to get to. I found this out later. She filed a lawsuit against George Mason University. I don't remember what all the grounds were. A an attorney by the name of Edward Sisson took on the case pro bono, which means free of charge. The law firm he worked for also unfortunately, they were defending George Mason. This was kind of a conflict of interest situation where the same law firm representing George Mason is now going to represent someone that's suing George Mason. So he was forced to drop Carolyn Crocker as his client, but it didn't end there. They fired him, and I don't know if he's still he was never able to find employment for years. I don't know if he ever found employment, but that was pretty nasty. They didn't have to fire the attorney representing Carolyn Crocker, but they did. And so that's some pretty nasty dealings. And I began to get really cynical about how things really work. Again, I was kind of naive to how the culture is working. So Carolyn Crocker carried on. She continued teaching at Northern Virginia Community College, nearby college. There are lots of colleges here in Northern Virginia. And she was doing the same thing, and she was teaching intelligent design in her biology courses. It would be just like a 15-minute lecture. So she would just teach everything she was on the hook for, textbook stuff, but then she'll say, you know what, everything you've heard in their textbook, I have problems with. And it would be just like a 10-minute talk. And let me see if I could find it. Caroline Crocker, Northern Virginia Community College. There was I don't have it. I think it was a Washington Post article. Let's see if it was in the Washington Post. I think I may have found it. It was September 18th. Let's see if did they have a picture of Dr. Crocker in there? I don't know. I'm gonna put this in the chat. I'm not gonna read it. Maybe this subject of yet another show. She started teaching this. It got in the Washington Post. Her students were just ecstatic that she started telling the truth and saying, evolutionary theory is not well supported. And by the way, when I was at George Mason, and by the way, it was also kind of hard to read through that article because the chairmen and professors there were people I knew or were associated with, and people that were involved in granting my diplomas, like my diplomas over here. And I'm glad I got my diploma at the time before I came out of the closet, so they couldn't pull it back. At least I don't think they can. Anyway, she got fired from Northern Virginia Community College too. The faculty were just incensed. And so where did this all lead? Bill Dembski, who I was associated with, Carolyn Crocker, who I was associated with, Robert Marks, who I was supposed to go to study in Baylor, who I was acquainted with, and all my friends. There was this movie called Expelled that starred Ben Stein, and I was actually interviewed for the movie. I didn't make the final cut. Let me show a trailer of Expelled. So go back to that prayer I said. Fall of 2004 was me and another student, Christy, and we were just praying, oh Lord, please help our intelligent design movement, help us get national attention. Well, I get in the prestigious scientific journal Nature. Carolyn Crocker is there. She goes on to this motion picture movie. So God did not let our work be forgotten. And sometimes when Carolyn Crocker gives talks about her expulsion from not just George Mason University, Northern Virginia Community College, but basically from the scientific enterprise itself. She's been blacklisted. She sent 300, maybe over like 240 resumes, probably more. And she would, despite being qualified, she'd be turned down. She had one job she got as a researcher after her days at George Mason, but that didn't last long because it was funded by an NIH grant. And this I'm getting the second hand, so if I get my facts a little bit wrong, apologies in advance. She said what happened to her, she got fired because the government administrator who was processing the grant said, if you have Carolyn Crocker's name on any of your research papers that are published, we're going to cancel your grant. And so even though she probably was on good terms with her boss, they said, we got to let you go. That's how business is done. That's how business is done. And so let me show you the trailer of this motion picture video. It tells the story of me and my friends. So if you wonder why I'm so committed, how I got involved in this was the beginning. So first it was, and always is, primarily about me studying intelligent design to help me build my Christian faith. But secondly, I saw the injustice done to my good friends, like Carolyn Crocker, very fine. She was beloved by her students. When I was going around George Mason University and talking to the students that knew her, they said she was the most wonderful teacher. And there were lots of biology majors saying they don't believe in evolution. She's telling it right. A little funny thing about George Mason University, it's quietly been a creationist factory. Carolyn Crocker, she's not a creationist, ID advocate. George Mason has awarded 3 PhD biology degrees to creationists, young earth creationists. I'll name them: Timothy Standish, Timothy Brophy, Gordon Wilson. So it's 3 at least that I know personally. There is someone who got his undergraduate there and then got a doctorate in education. The name should be familiar, Charles Jackson. So Carolyn Crocker, Timothy Standish, Timothy Brophy, Gordon Wilson, Charles Jackson. Last but not least, me, yours truly. And so there are probably more. So I'm going to see if I can bring this. I'll close this discussion with how my prayer was answered. One of the ways that it was answered by showing this clip of Ben Stein, the movie Expelled. So Carolyn Crocker was in the movie Expelled, and so were my friends. And so that was how my prayer was answered. That our work at George Mason University, on behalf of intelligent design, at me at a personal level, this is also my work for Jesus Christ. This is how it was answered. I then went on to actually study creationism, young earth creationism. And I did not know that I really had other plans than going to do this professionally. And I had no idea that I'd end up working for Dr. John Sanford for 6.5 years. I still work for him part-time, but reduced hours. He's had a long, illustrious career, and I think he needs to slow down. The guy is just like the Energizer Bunny, and I think the family members after his angioplasty, I think everyone, probably friends and family, myself included, are saying, John, you got to slow down. You got to slow down. So he may or may not be winding down some of his research activities. But let me share. By the way, thank you. I've not been able to read the chat while I went on this, goodness, 1.5 hour monologue. I can't believe I'm normally not this chatty, but I don't know, sometimes when I'm very passionate about a subject, I can't stop talking about it. That's just very natural. So anyway, let me see if I can share this screen, and I'll show a clip from Expelled, the motion picture Expelled. I have so many windows open, I don't know which one is which. Let's try this one. All right.
moving through history in an unguided and undesigned way, the theory of evolution.
Excuse me,
Yes, Ben.
how did life begin in the first place?
Mr. Stein, you have the same question every time.
Well, you never answer it, sir.
It develops, you know, we've been through this so many times. You have me
Could there have
so...
been an intelligent designer?
So what are you here for?
I made a movie.
Join Ben Stein in this year's most controversial documentary film.
If they value their careers, they should keep quiet about their intelligent design views.
I was viewed as an intellectual terrorist.
I have never been treated like this in my 30 years in academia.
I lost my job.
It's a funny thing that questions that aren't properly answered don't go away.
How did we get from an inorganic world to the world of the cell?
It might have started off on the backs of crystals.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. So intelligent designers believe that God is the designer.
God is about as unlikely as fairies, angels, hobgoblins, etc.
Science makes no use of the hypothesis of God.
I mean, it's essentially official policy of the National Academy of Science that religion and science will not be related.
There are people out there who want to keep science in a little box where it can't possibly touch a higher power, cannot possibly touch God.
Must be some movie.
Expelled. No intelligence allowed.
It's awesome.
I'm muted. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I was just talking and I was totally muted. Sorry. So I'm unmuted now. I was saying I'm going to be closing the show. I'd like to thank everyone for visiting and supporting my channel. If you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it helps promote the channel. Google has some way. I would presume that it helps the search engine stuff. So so now I'm talking, and thank you guys for letting me know when there's no sound. I want to finish a thought that I think I didn't quite complete. Whenever Carolyn Crocker is talking about her ordeal at George Mason University and afterwards, if I'm in the audience, she'll say, you know whose real fault this was that I got fired? Salvador, because he prayed that we'd get all this publicity at George Mason University, and we sure did. And she'll just say that obviously in kidding. And I'd like to get in touch with Dr. Crocker maybe someday and find out how she's doing. And I should be praying for her, and we all should. So I would really like to thank you for you all for supporting this channel. If you haven't, please subscribe so that we can. It's free to subscribe, and hopefully you don't get any annoying emails or notifications spamming your email. I never do when I've subscribed to other channels, but I believe that it helps the Google search engine. Plus, if I get up to 1,000 subscribers, I can start putting those annoying ads, like on some other channels. No, I'm just kidding. I'll try to keep that to a minimum. So thank you all who've been a part of this stream, both live and in recording. Take care. God bless you and have a great day.